Fijn dat jullie er zijn. Vandaag hebben wij Marnix als spreker en daar zijn we eigenlijk heel blij mee. Marnix is een collega van mij en lecturer Digital Media Concepts. En die houdt zich bezig met wat kunnen dit soort IX, VR, AR, MR platformen nou betekenen voor onder andere training en educatie. De eerste vraag heb ik al gesteld. Wordt de opname achteraf gedeeld? Yes, die is daarna online toegankelijk via YouTube. Dus als je naar mylives.eu gaat, dan kan je alles wat Marnix zegt terug horen. Maar vandaag hebben we het geluk dat we hem nu ook live bij ons hebben. Marnix, de floor is yours.
Ja.
Hoe we het meestal opbouwen is dat Marnix nu 20 minuten zijn verhaal vertelt. Half uur, mag zelfs iets langer. En daarna gaan we dan vragen beantwoorden. En daarin willen we ook graag een actieve discussie met jullie aangaan. Want jullie zijn hier vast in geïnteresseerd. En weten er vast al het een en ander vanaf. En we zijn vooral benieuwd wat jullie denken, hoe jullie deze trainingen bijvoorbeeld kunnen inzetten in je eigen organisatie. Oké, Marnix, nu is het echt woord aan jou.
En zal ik eerst even kijken, is het in het Engels of in het Nederlands? Zijn er mensen die English or Dutch? Any English?
Someone actually who's in the group who's English, who prefers English. Yeah, let's do it in English.
English?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that feels immediately more international. Oh, you have to give me the possibility to share my screen.
Yes. There you go.
Yeah. Thank you. And then. So is it sharing?
Perfect.
Yeah, so you see the big, okay. Well then, welcome everybody. And yeah, I'm sure that Nick is checking the chat. So if you have questions in between, I will just shout it out and I'll try to answer. And because I can talk forever, so that's already a warning. But today I will talk only, or hopefully have discussions about the possible added value of VR and AR in learning and in training. It's something that a lot of people are interested in, and it's already a wide field. So what I would love to do is to give you an overview of some of the projects that we have. And of course, many of the projects are also, you can choose which one you want to hear more about. So just swipe me to the left or to the right if you think that's already enough. But to give you some of the projects that we did on this topic, ranging from training into branding or training into health or training or education for the sake of education, or actually things that have been developed that are not developed for training or for learning or for education, but actually have a very huge learning or education effect. We have it, of course, for, from the background that we do, we have incredible many projects already based on VR, AR, or immersive media and training right now, with a large team of developers and a large team of people trying to figure out what is the effect of the things that we develop, with a huge number of labs that we work in. So sometimes we measure the experience with the experience lab, sometimes it's in traditional way, and sometimes it's already in the development or in the tools itself, with a large consortium and network of people and developers as well. And we do it from one point of view already that we immediately want to share, and that is when we talk about training and when we do the effect, we always do it from the point of view of context. So that means that we are not so interested in whether virtual reality or augmented reality or XR works as a training, but does it work actually better or maybe in a different way compared to traditional media that are being used for training. So that's one of the key things that we constantly want to know, like what is the difference, to understand what is the added value, and that you can make a choice in whether or not to use and how to use VR or AR in a training. So that's the most important thing. Like, what are you comparing with when you say it works or it doesn't work? So that's what we try to give in some of the examples that we have. And that's already the first one when we started. It's one that we created for Aegon, it's more a learning about organization. So it has to do with employee branding. And it was a project where, when we started with it already, I think 10 years ago, asking for, okay, what is the problem if you are a company that wants to attract young people for onboarding, and while your brand is not, the most famous brand among young people. And we talked about it, and there was a lot of learnings and a lot of research done inside of Aegon, and they talked about, if only in the customer journey they could experience what it is to be working with us. And when we hear experience and we hear something of presence or experience, we think like, okay, then VR could maybe have an added value. So we started for them to create like, okay, can we give people a clear feeling what it is actually to work at a company? Can you actually experience your first day when you have an onboarding? And can you learn more about the organization in VR compared to other media? So we started working on that and started to create, almost like a digital twin of working inside of the company. Where they said, okay, what are the assets? And they said, we have a beautiful, building. And we want to really that people know what it is to work at in this case, Aegon. So you have to make all kinds of decisions when you start developing it. So decisions about how are we going to present the company in VR? Do we really need authenticity? So we use 360 recordings with real people, or are we going to use actors, or are we going to make something inspirational using what we call CG, computer generated? And in the end, we decided to make a mixture. So we made a mixture where people can actually be inside of the building and interact with the building, and then see in 360 all kinds of different things that from research we learned that they want to know about a company. In this case, they wanted to know simple things like what it is to have a lunch with your colleagues. What are people wearing? How are they doing that? What happens with an idea that I have? How do people negotiate? How do they, with young people, talk about it? So you could be at meetings that they have, but you could also do an onboarding interview inside of the VR. And it was created, you can see it's our old logo, NHTV, so that's how old it already is, where they started with the building. So you had this immersive media where you were submerged in the water, and the building started to build around you. And then you can choose different options in English or in Dutch to have different experiences inside of the building. And of course, the client in this case also wanted to know, like, does this really help? Does this, give us some extra compared to normal, the normal way we do it, the traditional media of learning? And in this case, that was mostly, it's about videos they use, like company videos explaining what happens. And they said, is there an added value? So immediately we also started doing a research where there was this gap, like, can you help us in the onboarding and learning? Can you help us that they can experience already the first day? And does it have an added value, in understanding who we are as a company, but also does it increase, the fact that they want to pursue a job at Aegon? So together with students, we designed an experiment where we had 3 conditions. The VR combined with the media conditions, so combined with traditional media of YouTube movies that showed the same things about the company. The VR only, so where you had the previous experience, or the only the company video, and we started to compare them for research. And we had participants that was the target group for them, so young people, mainly students who were looking for a job or at the end of their studies, with in that case already like almost no or intermediate VR experience. And the results showed a lot of things, but sadly, if you're in marketing, or in the budget, more is better. So in this case, there was a very clear advantage when you use the combination of VR and traditional media. It had a clear increased effect over the single medium. It's only VR or only medium or only a traditional media. But we also saw that the VR itself already also had an additional effect and positive effect over the traditional media as well, when it was on willingness to pursue a job at Aegon, or to have a clear image and learnings about what the company was, although it was less strong. So here you see some of examples of the graph of how that works, and where, when it's about employee attractiveness or familiarity with the company, or, the things of the image, where the biggest effect was. And every time you could see that the VR, but the combination had the best effect. And if you...
Still people
Yep.
in the waiting room. And since I gave you the host control, I can't add them in. Can you maybe in the participation section click on iedereen toelaten?
Admit all.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Are they all admitted? Okay. Welcome as well. So that was the first example for the new people, and if people want to read more about it, there's a journal written, a paper where you can go into the depth of the results as well. And I will share the slides through Mindlabs as well, so that you can click on it and you get to the articles, so that you can read it if you want to know more about it. These kind of learnings and these kind of questions we constantly get. So we have a lot of questions about, it's about learning and education about a company, and sometimes about branding, and they go back and forth. And a different kind of question was about learning using augmented reality. Again, it's a project from a long time ago, using the HoloLens for AR, where the company wanted to actually know if you have, in this case, a brand segmentation model that uses, different axes for how to position your brand compared to competitors, which is not only on 2 levels, but on 3 levels. Would it also be better than for people to make better decisions if you see the data in a hologram compared to like normal 2D visualization or 2.5D? And there was a question that they wanted to know, and they had a brand model, and they wanted to know, like, can we also put this in a hologram? So we built the same model, but then in a hologram. So we compared the 2D model that they have, that you can access through your laptop, with the 3D model. And we wanted to know, like, do people make different decisions, yes or no? So we did while we were developing it, we did also a research with media strategists and media planning agencies, where they actually had different scenarios where we asked them, who's your biggest competitor? Or if you go towards a more, open organization, who will be your new competitors and where you will go? And whether they had, a better understanding of their competitors in the 3D visualization compared to the 2.5D, which we have no word for, the desktop version of the visualization of the data. And again, we saw a very positive effect on the AR. So that means that the augmented reality. I'm getting a crash. Let me see, hopefully it works. Yeah. So we had a positive evaluation that the augmented reality and the data in a hologram was much better, in the sense of they liked it much more. It was much more useful. We saw different strategies that they did. So the behavior changed when it's in 3D or in 2D. But in the end, we also asked, so are you going to use it? And despite even that the project got, had a lot of awards and positive results, they said, no, we're not going to use it. And why? Because, the simple thing that, there's a newness effect and people were less familiar with how to use it. But the key reason is, a lot of people don't have an augmented reality device yet, especially in that time. And that gives us to another thing that we do with all our projects when we look at, why would you use AR or VR? What are the advantages in training and education, and what are the disadvantages? And we see that the disadvantages really have to do with several dimensions, adoption dimensions. So when we start a project in AR and VR on training or education, we really want to know that, all the adoption dimensions for people, consumers, to adopt, a training, or a company to adopt a training and make it. We have to make sure that all these dimensions are clear. There needs to be enough content. The creation of the course or the education that you do needs to be easy. The connection with the people and how you share it has to be very easy, and also with a lot of people, how you distribute your training is a very important question from the start. Of course, the channel, what is possible with the VR, you know, the glasses, how comfortable are they? What is the setting that they can do? And of course, the costs. So we always, when we start already with filling in these gaps so that you have a clear idea of the strategy before you start creating an AR VR experience. And of course, we always talk about what is the added value. So from all the projects that we did, if your training or education involves some kind of experience, then it's fruitful to do and use AR and VR. If experience is not really needed, you really can question, do you need an AR or VR training tool? And if you need experience, then of course it's really important, how do you build that experience? And so we know that why does VR give this extra experience compared to traditional media? So when you do an education or training, and compared to, you know, traditional media, we see that it's very important that when you start building something or testing it, you need to have these 5 or 6 P's ready. So if you can make use of these 6 P's, then it's interesting to make it, and you can increase the effect of your education tool. So it needs to have presence, so that feeling that you're really there, and you can create it through perspective, so that, you know, you really have to make sure that there is something important of a perspective, to see it from high up, low, down, around you. So that's really important. If that's not needed, maybe don't use VR. The same for proximity. VR brings you very close to something that is impossible or very difficult to get close to in real life or through other media. Can be something dangerous, like, you know, for fear of heights, it's very, you know, dangerous to get there. It's a training about that. Or it's about social proximity, you know, can you be very close to a person, and in that sense. Participation is also very important. So, you know, the VR has this added value like gaming, that you really can participate as yourself, or from a point of view, the other one from a different point of view. You can see and train and educate something, having a point of view from a different person than yourself, and putting you in a place and in a context. And when you're put in a place or in context, you will behave in that sense. And that is really a strong case for VR. So to give you another example, one of the first things that we created as well a long time ago was a public speech training. So for people with a speech anxiety. And you can see that we use all the 5 P's in there. So, you know, there's participation. You are really doing the presentation. So you're being put inside of a class, and inside of the classroom, you can start with, you know, graded exposure, where you have an empty class or a half-filled class or a full filled class with people, and you participate in it. It's really the perspective as well. So they're very close, you know, you're in the class. It's they're very near in front of you. There's the point of view is still you. So you're really, in this case, it's important that it's you, because you're the one who's, you know, fearful for that. So that it has all these different elements. And then of course you want to know, does this work? So it's, again, immediately when starting to develop it together also with students, we know that this is an important thing. So worldwide, 20% suffers from speech anxiety. There are, you know, different tools, and they are expanding very rapidly. It's called virtual reality exposure therapy, in this case for speech anxiety. But they are not really developed. At that time, there were not many of there, but now there's much more out there. But you want to still see, like, what is the added value? So we did another research, longitudinal quasi experiment, where people at home could experience and have their own VR set, the lowest of the lowest, carton board VR, and where they had, you know, at home 3 sessions divided over a month, and they could choose in the different sessions how many times they wanted to use it themselves. And then we did all kinds of measurements that have to do with speech anxiety questions. We had people that had a moderate to high level of speech anxiety up front, and we had 36 participants that started doing this and also made the full session. The results, again, was very, very interesting. You can see that just using the lowest level of VR decreased speech anxiety a lot. They used their, in the first, we had 3 moments of measurements. On average, they used it 3 times for the first measurements, then another 4 times at home with the second, and another 3 times for the final measurement. And we saw that there's definitely an effect, and it had more effect the more actually anxiety there was, because the immersion was even stronger for the people who are really fearful for that situation. Again, if you want to read more about this, you can read that. It's called In the Beat to Fear. It's in the Journal of Cyber Psychology, Behavior, and Social Networking if you want to know more about the details, and also where sometimes there wasn't a difference and why that is. So this is virtual reality exposure therapy. Here you see another one. So we do a lot with virtual reality exposure therapy. It's one of the most evolved domains when it comes to VR and AR, where there's already tons and tons of virtual reality exposure out there. We do another one, which is called for alcohol addiction. So we have like recovery, where you can see that it's a super important thing on the European and worldwide agenda. There's a lot of illnesses, a lot of injuries, and a lot of people that suffer from alcohol addiction. And we also see that with the traditional training methods and therapy sessions, there's a lot of relapse. So people still come back. So the challenge is there's a lot of money being spent for real world training, but it's very difficult. It's difficult to train people in the context of where the things that they are craving for. So they are looking for exposure therapy and adding it with VR. You bring the worlds to the people in a safe environment, and you start to make them learn about, in this case, their fear. It's already been super successful, so we see it's being used in all kinds of phobia, whether it's fear of people or fear of spiders or fear of heights, and it's being used everywhere. So it's not something new, and there's a lot of studies out there, but the studies also have like mixed, mixed results. There's a lot of short-term studies going on, and not so much long-term studies. And also you see that it's about effect and not efficiency. Like, what is the added value really compared to traditional learning and traditional training methods? There's a lot of gaps as well. So one of the gaps that we try to fill is if you make a training, which is in this case for virtual exposure therapy, but you will see it also in other training. Do we want to use like recordings, real world recordings in VR, or do we make something in CG? If we make something in CG, that has a lot of advantages, like, you have the advantage of you have full control of the world. You can change everything that you want to change. But of course, it's more complex, it's more expensive, it's less personalized. In 360, you have more personalized, but it's very difficult. Do you get permission to make these recordings at people's home? But also, once you have the recording, it's very difficult to change something about it. In this case, for the alcohol, it's very difficult, to change. If you have somebody who drinks beer and then you want to show it to somebody who drinks wine, I'm not able to suddenly change that. And we don't know how people react to these worlds. So we don't know if people react differently to a 360 environment compared to a CG environment. And that's something that we want to research through all the projects as well. And especially also if we then input, also virtual humans, what kind of levels should they have and what kind of level of detail and realism should they have? So we also do a lot of research on this, and there's a lot of recovery research where we try to, on the one hand, do it from a business side. How do people accept it? Why would they use it? What are the thresholds? What are the advantages? And of course, also what are the effects on the long term and short term in the purpose that it needs to do in the craving. So we did a lot of research. This is one example of a research where we did with 60 real patients, dividing them over 3 different groups. The traditional therapy, the therapy with the VR only 360 and the VR only with the CG. And then we had a lot of questions and surveys, and we could see a lot of craving effects and the effects of self-control. So it really works and people really want to do it. But we also got a lot of recommendations about could it be more realistic? Should you also add the virtual humans? Should it be more personalized? So we do a constant research on all these new questions. And for instance, we also create some of the first in the world, like in this case, an augmented reality exposure therapy, which is not in VR, but in AR, where, people will, give you and invite you for a drink. And then you have to, of course, try to say no to it. And then the question is, can it be efficient with low level people, or should it be something like a high realistic person that offers you the drink? Does it matter, yes or no, for training purposes? If you want to read more, there's much more there. You can, again, read all kinds of articles where we try to research this in qualitative, quantitative way. Or you can go to the website where also all the knowledge is stored if you want to know more about how we did it and what we developed and with whom. So this question is super important, and this realistic question is very important as well on different domains as well. So another training and education that we've made is called the Virtual Reality Emergency Trainer for the company Schola Medica. They train doctors, general practitioners, and people training to become a doctor, to follow a certain protocol when they do a training. And this protocol is called the ABCDE protocol, where they have to learn to go through all the processes in order to avoid mistakes that they normally make. And they're being trained mainly in live settings. So it's a training where you have live actors doing a live session in where they follow that training in a live way. But the question was, can we also do this in VR? So what would be the added value if we train them in VR, and what should we then actually train? And it started with the idea, okay, we make a training almost like a digital twin, where, you know, we look for a 360 recording of the training with actors, and we add all kinds of things that are not possible or difficult to do in a real life setting training. So we want to have a different location that is, you know, that is more suitable for the VR. We want to have extra actors, because that's expensive if you have more actors. And we do things that are really suitable for VR. For instance, they wanted to be sure that, can we train them, for instance, where they are also really distracted. So, you know, they have to do their normal protocol, but let's distract them. So in this case, you have a really, you know, the daughter of the patient who fell down is really yelling at the doctor of like, you know, what are you doing? Are you crazy? And the advantage, again, you know, if you think about the 5 Ps and the perspective, is that you really are distracted. So this person is standing behind you, and you have to look to your right or to your left, you know, and still do the same things that you normally do. So you make a whole scenario with all kinds of questions and all kinds of interactivity. But at the same time, while we were doing this, we had another opportunity with one of the partners, like 40R Studios and the Chronosphere project, where there's another thing that we could do. Instead of 360, we could also make it in CG and actually make, you know, real life recordings in CG, where, you know, we have more understanding of a CG environment. In 360, for instance, the problem is you can only, from this standpoint of view, you can look around, but you cannot walk around. So that's one of the disadvantages of training in 360. So you have your perspective from a standing point of view, but sometimes it's also necessary that you can walk around or do things. Like if you have to make an assessment of what happened with the patient, you want to walk around it. So we also made with the team a CG version, you know, where there's a computer generated with vocab characters. And then we wanted to do, of course, a comparison study where you can see that you have a 360 as well as a CG version. And then we compare what is the difference in effect in how people train.
Waar zit de pijn? Hier. Okay.
So in this case, we did another research. Oh, I don't know why this is happening. So then let me put all the things in there already. So we have this design where we did another experiment. We wanted to actually do a 3 experiment where we, you know, compared the live training with the 360 training with the 360 and CG training, which we did. But we had only enough participants for comparing really the 360 and the vocab, and of course the total of that at Schola Medica. So we measured all kinds of things, of course, attention, experience, the performance, you know, the self-efficacy, the satisfaction, usability, and of course the learning objectives. We had 64 participants, where also 47 of them participated in long interviews. And they were all elderly care students in general practitioners in training. So they already had some experience, of course, in the real life training, because it's also a refreshment course. So 91% already had some experiments in having, you know, had to do with a real life training, real life event, and also had training in that. But most of them, as still is the case, didn't have any experience in VR. So again, we have to deal with the newness effect and that it's new. And those who have VR most of the time only have like an, you know, experience in entertainment or something like that, but not really in training. And again, you know, the results show very interesting, a super much learning. Yeah, so there's a lot of cognitive learning in the VR. and that they really liked it and recommended it, not as a replacement, as we often see, but as an additional tool. And they started saying like, okay, because we can learn the cognitive skills also in a very secure way without a doctor looking with us. We can do the cognitive skills in the VR, and that gives room to do different things in the live actor. So we can put more on skills and more complex issues. So they found it very useful, and but what we didn't see was a lot of positive effects of the total, the total experience. Gives them a lot of confidence, a lot of learnings, and they like the autonomy of it, learning it. We also ask questions: where do you want to learn it? At home, in the school, at a different place? Is it for refreshment? And we can share all those results as well. But what we didn't really, and we also saw that one of the key reasons why this worked is actually the presence and experience. So that gave, a key reason why a VR worked, and they wanted actually more of that. But we didn't see so much differences between the 360 and the full cap, which is also very interesting. So, but we saw that, they wanted to do the full cap where you could look around. They said, we want more complex scenarios now. These are the simple scenarios, but give us more complex scenarios with the full cap. So the 360 you can use for the traditional learning, but for the full cap where you really have to look around, they wanted to have more complex scenarios. So that's something that we will do in the future. Again, you can read all about it and have much more information if you want about how we developed it, what kind of experiences, what are the cognitive measurements, where do they want to learn, how do they want to learn, what are the improvements on different effects. What we also did in that study is, do you like to use this? Yes or no? Do you want to recommend this? And what we did with the team, with our team, is we checked for what are the key aspects for people to recommend or use a training in the future. And we wanted to do that because with the partners as Dutch Rose Media and 4DR Studios, we wanted to know, like, can we have only a few questions that we can build inside of the VR based on, what are the key predictors for people to use or not use a training? Because then we can build it inside of the VR and we can continuously start measuring the effect of a training and benchmark it also to others. Because, when is it a good training, yes or no? And that's something that we did in one of the other projects that we did. So this is a safety training. So together with the 4DR Studio and Dutch Rose Media, they created the safety training for Cola, in which they have also a lot of issues about you have to do a safety round, inspection round of the terminals. It's very important. If something happens and a terminal blows up, then of course half of Rotterdam is gone. So you have to constantly train people in there. And this is one of the first projects where we actually also build in the questions so that they, inside of the VR, during the training, also ask questions about the results, but also about, whether they would recommend it, yes or no. And of course, we do immediately a research with it. So in this case, the prevention of, the impact, the constant training is super important for a company like Cola. They also have really problems like routine blindness, for people that train but don't really get it anymore because it's a routine. You can also see low motivation because you constantly have to train. But what is your motivation if you succeed, because nothing happens because you succeed. So can we give them, more reward using trainings like VR or AR? So we try to make it, to give them more motivation and to make, the invisible success visible of what you're doing. And of course, you need more variation and smarter solution. That's what they wanted from the VR training. So again, while developing, we did another study, a survey after they did the VR experience all first time. So they went to the employees went into the VR training, and after the training, they got an online questionnaire that they had to fill in at Cola. And again, the measurements were kind of like evaluations, recommendations, what is the experience that they had, the usability, their learnings. And we also wanted to know what is the role of virtual humans in it and the effect of realism, yes or no. So again, we made a digital twin kind of thing of a real digital storage tank. And in there were like 13 incidents that they had to find and also correctly report. So it was on the one hand, finding the right things, and then how do they report it actually, and do they do it in the right way? We had, again, a lot of the participants, this is not correct. I see that this is a copy paste. So we had a lot of the participants that did the training, and some of them also were involved in the research part. And in the research part, for those who involved it inside of the VR, they also, of course, had the gamification of reporting and or finding the incident and reporting it in the right way. So we had actually more participants that only did that and were not involved in the research yet. Again, we see a lot of added value, so increased learning, motivation. They all said that the realism is super important for them to do this. They enjoy doing this. They find it very important, and also helps them to remind the importance of training. Half of them also said it really will increase my performance. They would recommend it to other people, around 64%, and 20% said no. For them, it was an added value, and they would use it even more often. There were also some things that that could be improved, but for most of them, it was like, yeah, okay, I really like being, having that presence and the experience in there. And again, it gives like a good added value for it. But of course, you have the newness effect, so they have to learn, they have to have more guidance in the process itself. And they said, like the virtual humans and the way it felt is super real for most of them. That's like almost 80% said like this really feels like, a real training, and that's really important for them to engage and to do the things in a real way, and not, in a how do you say it, like in a game or in a fast manner that they wanted to get rid of it. But because of the newness effect, they also wanted to have some usability issues. They wanted to have more, more clearness about what to do. There's still the things of, becoming dizzy for some. So there's still things that you have to improve, giving better instructions. And interestingly, also some of them said, yeah, I felt distracted, of the people around me when I was doing this, but still they prefer to have this training at Kolen, with other people there. So that's something that they still valued, also because they could talk about it. And I'm not allowed to share, the results inside of the VR, but we could say there's still room for improvement. So if you want to know more about this project, we can see what we can share from that project. But it's another example of how experience really creates a new setting where you have a digital twin, but of course you can do all the incidents in there, and you have to still come up with all kinds of strategy decisions. So for instance, do you want to have them showcasing only a few incidents so that you have reruns of the training, or do you want to show them all together? Do you want to have a performance indicator? So if, for instance, when they went in to also challenge the people who are already very experienced, we asked them, how good do you think you will score? And then they will see their final score again. But you can also make them compete to each other. Now, two more examples. And Nick will stop me, right?
Yeah, can we start to round up, because then we also have time for questions?
Yeah, and I'll give you one of the final examples. It's the BHE VR. So there's more things that you can do inside of the VR. So here we wanted to know something that already exists, created by Inversed and the partners over there, BMV, is where you have, really a skill set for training and finding, the problems of a risk and inventory in your office, and normally that's trained in real life as well. And they had created already a trainer for that in VR, but they wanted to know, like, can we add this also with eye tracking so that we can see where the people are? So we added we added a virtual reality, in the virtual reality, the eye tracking possibility, so that you can see where do they look at, and what do they actually consider as dangerous and not. So again, very important. So there's 220,000 accidents per year in the Netherlands only. And although a risk inventory is obliged for every company, only 33% of the companies does it. And they also wanted to know, actually, is there, what is the added value of the eye tracking, but also for the trainers? So again, we did a research, but this time, we really concentrated on the trainers instead of the trainees. So what is in there for them? And we did a whole research on, having them showcasing, being inside of the VR and eye tracking and seeing like, is this an added value for you and why? We see again that the added value was very high. They all came back with the piece why. So it said, yeah, I missed a lot of things as well. So they realized that their own behavior as a trainer was not always correct. Actually, they missed things as well themselves, which they were not aware of. They said it gives us really like a good place for discussion as a communication training, because we can talk about things inside of the inside of the environment. You can also see that it was, things like objective. We don't have to argue again, did they see it or did they not see it? They cannot remember it. It's a fact, and they can give constructive feedback. And also, the point of view really gives them a concrete of like, okay, why did you do this? So they said it really enriches the training itself. It gives us added value and added data to do this. And they come also with new ideas. So they said, okay, it's an assessment tool, so you can train by observing, but we also have new questions, why did you look at it or not? Now, then really the final one, Nick, because I wanted to give one example where sometimes you don't want to create something with the purpose of training, but with the purpose of entertainment, but has really value in training, even though you don't want it. So one of the nicest projects that we did now is that the organizations we work with created the Imaginary Friend. And the Imaginary Friend is a very interesting project that I'll just show you. Is the sound okay?
Hello?
Okay.
Oh, can you do that again?
The Imaginary Friend is a virtual reality experience about a little kid, and this kid has a very vivid imagination.
I think the main line of the film is a kid trying to accept the loss of his mother.
And at a certain point, he makes up you, the player of the experience, and you help him overcome his fears.
So it's actually like a movie, and it's an entertainment part, but there is a learning part in that. So we wanted to also have a research around it, and the research on the one hand is concentrated on the business models. How do you actually sell something like this, which is very difficult? How do you sell virtual humans? How do you make a connection? But also really about part of that was also, why do you like it? And the learning part was really, really interesting. So we did a large research on the Stripe Festival with the visitors, the event visitors, over 60 people, which we all interviewed after they had their first experience. And we talked about, why did they like it? And they loved it so much. It's a unique experience where with a lot of, effects on realism, on presence, but also really on story understanding was really good, and they really liked it. But the key thing was like, why do you like this experience? And one of the things that came out of it, the number 3 was the learning, so next to the entertainment was the learning. And the learning is so incredibly large that, it's even if it's not the purpose, it's much more learnings than you would even imagine upfront, or the creators had imagined. So they had learnings about the role of an imaginary friend, about grief dealing. They said that we have an understanding of how a child's mind works, the effect of bullying, how to create an open dialogue, and even the role of an imaginary friend. And it came with a long, long list of, what an imaginary friend can do and why, and all kinds of arguments that upfront even we didn't know, or the creators didn't know. So even though it's not designed to give you really a learning, it's part of it, it's really designed as an entertainment product, the learning is incredibly high for people. And maybe that's sometimes also good to understand, that it doesn't necessarily always have to be a product that is really aimed at learning to make people learn. So again, you can read much more about this as well. We can share it. We're still doing the analysis, but there's much more over there. But Nick, I will stop because it's important to experiment, right? So I'll stop for questions.
Very nice, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? I already saw a question from Peter in the chat. Are there more? So let's start with the question from Peter then. Question for after presentation. I'm curious why you chose for young people within the research. I see your research is 70 to 22 and average age is 25. That is a bit at the earlier concept that you showed. So I think it's Aegon and the project before recovery.
So why we focused on the young people? Yeah, well, in case for Aegon, it was their target group because they wanted to have the organization had to be attractive for young people, and they had trouble at attracting these young people because they go to all kinds of other companies, and the insurance companies and those companies didn't really have a good branding. So it was also really about how can we have new tools and new ways to reach that audience. So that's a logic one. For recovery, we don't aim at young people, so I don't know where that came from. We actually we do a lot of research on real clients, and they are from every age. So a lot of the studies we do over there is between 18 years old and 70. So there we have all the
in age groups.
We don't see so much differences, by the way, in age groups. So for young and old people, the VR works and the AR works. Young people, but it's more big gaming, have a little bit more of an intuitive understanding how to navigate in VR. So they don't need so much time, or the newness effect is not that strong compared to old people, whatever old means. So old people, we give a little bit more time to get accustomed to the and we give them much more instructions. They need much more instruction how to navigate and practice. But the experience itself, really enough, we see that the older they get, the even longer they want to stay in there and feel very comfortable.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Also students, if you ask them a question and you start to talk over it right after, you never get a question. If you have one, please ask it. I have another question. And you see now there are already quite a bit VR applications, but still quite a novelty in a lot of organizations. Why do you think that is?
Well, that mainly has to do with the first slide, the adoption criteria. So one of the biggest issues is that VR and also AR, when it comes to AR with glasses, is not a consumer good yet. So that means if you want to do like a training for a lot of people, so in the same goes for schools with large classes, or with, if you want to create a training that you can reach people with at home, that's very difficult because a lot of people just don't have the glasses. So that's a problem. That's the key problem, actually. And also because there's still a lot of shitty content out there. We also make a lot of mistakes because it's still a learning process. So we sometimes make exactly the same thing that you do in a normal training as well. And then you're like, well, but then what is the added value, because you can do it on a desktop or online learning. So there's a lot of learning on what to create and how to create it. And also sometimes there's not really an ownership. For instance, people are asking like, who owns this? Does this need to come from the educational people inside an organization, or the innovative people, or the media people, or the ICT people? So there's not an ownership, and they talk, they give some seeding money, some innovation money, but that often never works because if the seeding money goes away, then the whole project falls apart. So those are some of the reasons why it's still very innovative. And there's still improvements because there's some still technology that is not flawless yet. Some people think it's uncomfortable with the headsets, or if you release the new Apple AR and it's €3,500, that's not really something that you immediately would buy. So those are a few reasons, but in some branches it's already super normal. So people say like, oh, it's still very innovative, but if you look at therapy sessions or something like that, or in-house company trainings, like even the US Army, they use over 60,000 of these glasses to train people. Banks use it also with 40,000. Supermarkets use it. There's huge examples already out there as well.
And you said there's still a lot of shitty content around, and then we learn. Do you think these lessons learned from this creating shitty content are shared among us?
No, yeah, we learn constantly. Like in the beginning, it was of course also to make sure that we don't make people nauseous, because in the beginning there was still latency effects that were problematic, and then we put people into all kinds of experiences, and the only thing that they did was coming out vomiting with so that's from a technological point of view. But it starts with making sure that people understand what is the experience, what is the added value. So you're not creating a training, but you really have to think from that starting point view of what is the added value that we want to create. And once you have that clear, and also what is the added value compared to other training methods, it's much easier also for developers to create something, because they know what to create and what to do. And then you have to think about your goals, because sometimes it's just motivation for repeated training. So then you want to make an engagement, but sometimes it's really that you want to learn, a specific skill or specific context, and you can, and the more you know about that, so the more communication there is between the learning objectives and the developers, the better the content gets.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Is there anybody in the audience that also made a VR training or education tool?
See a hand being raised. Peter says yes. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Peter?
Normally I don't work with Zoom, so I have to look to the buttons. My English is a little bit medium, so I'm not very good English speaker, but I'll try. We made the ABCDE training in mixed reality with the Microsoft HoloLens. Our business company is called TrueSim, and I think we did a pretty good job last 2 years, because we made it to 15 organizations in the Netherlands and 1 in Belgium, and they all decided to, the English is now struggling with me, to go again with us. So they make a new commitment to us to train with us again.
That is nice.
And within the healthcare, that's a very good thing, I guess, because it's very slow and normally it doesn't work like this way. So we're proud of that. And it seems to be working. It's really great.
And why? So what is the added value, do you think?
There's a lot of added value. The trainees can train more often, shortly, instead of once a year. So they can get their training value at the same level. They also train more realistic. And when you train more realistic, you can make a better learning curve. I guess that's very important. You can train on the workspace, on the ward in the hospitals. So you don't have to go off the work, but you can train on your own place. I think it's cheaper than the normal training. And they can combine theory and practice. And that's, yeah, also a great thing. We researched about that.
That's great.
Are you content with it? Good answers?
Yeah.
Or you want to do more?
No, I love to see it.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk with each other once again.
Yeah.
Maybe it can be great.
Absolutely. Marnix, if you want to, can you leave your credentials in the chat and they can contact you? Or they can contact me at apeldoorn.and@bios.nl.
Oh,
It's also
I just heard we already have them, but it's no problem.
Perfect. Marnix, where do you think this technology will be in 5 years?
Oh, super fast. So for people who say it goes slow, I can understand, but if you have to buy constantly the equipment, it goes very fast. And one of the reasons actually people are not buying, because they're like, this is not good for the planet, all these different glasses. But there's a few things. You get the blurring. So, now there's still a distinction between AR and VR, but you will get more and more glasses that actually blur the AR and the VR function. So that's going to be a very important one, so that you can actually choose and switch between AR and VR instead of, seeing it as two separate ones. And you can see that the development goes on every direction. So they become smaller, they become easier to use because, you know, they really have to solve that, you know, the problem of all the effort that you have to do to make the thing work. It's like every project, you know, needs, you know, updates, needs explanation of how it works. It's very difficult to make it, you know, seamlessly work. So that's something for the next 5 years. I think it will go, and then I think it will become more and more mainstream as part of the whole production that we have already in 5 years. I don't think that the metaverse will go that fast, but
Yeah.
the access, yeah, will be there in 5 years.
And what do you love most about this field? Because it's your field, you're a professor in this. What is it? What is the thing that you love about it?
I love to see constantly that our behavior change due to the context where we're in.
Yeah.
So the stupid thing is if you put somebody in a concert in VR, they will act as if they're in a concert. If I put you in a dangerous situation, you will act as if you're in a dangerous situation. So for me, it's fascinating that we still take it as a realistic experience. So we really behave. I mean, in a way, we do that also with a book and a film, of course. You know, you get, you know, transported to it. But in this case, we completely act as it in that context with our behavior, with the things that we do. And that's, for me, is super fascinating. That, you know, so stupid. Sometimes people are really, you know, scared and they just forget to close their eyes and they are really acting as scared. Like, so it gives a whole new view of what is realistic and what not. We have a lot of discussions, like if you make yourself as a avatar and you change yourself, they say that's not really you, but is it? Maybe it's actually more you than the real you. So those discussions, whether you agree with it or not, are super interesting. So that's, for me, it's super fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your time. I enjoyed all the examples that you showed us, and it shows that there's already quite a big knowledge body there. And I'm very curious to see what other upcoming projects and therapies and trainings we will develop in the upcoming years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully with the network.
Absolutely. And I see you're not the only one. I think Sandra is also developing a training. Funding is still an issue. But for youth workers, Sandra, can you tell a little bit more about what this training should help these youth workers with?
I didn't understood. I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
Oh,
But
sorry.
yes, I can share a bit more. That's what I heard in the first part of your question.
Yeah. What should the training do for youth workers?
Okay. Yeah. So we think that there will be a lot to do. So it will be mainstream in the future. So we want to be ready for that. That's first of all. And what we see is that we want to implement it and use it in our youth work to build skills and see what goes wrong when young people start to use VR. And that's what we want to develop a training about. But it must be, in our case, we really want to build that training together with the young people to see what they need. So it will be more participative. So the real content we need to discover. But this is a bit the idea that we have right now, or actually for 2 years already. But as you could see, we didn't get the funding. But we are planning to work with a youth work sector in Ireland, who are developing quite well there. Hundreds of young people there are using VR and learning to cope with peers, etc. So what we see when we are using VR in our work with young people is that it is more about explaining how to behave, or we see a lot of young people not yet understanding how to behave. So you have some connection points to start chatting with the young people that you work with. So the training will be in that area.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Very, very relevant and there's some projects that are closely related to it that we can share or that we can combine, and hopefully there will be new funding opportunities also. We're working hard with the CIIC, so maybe you want to join because I think they should accept it. I don't know why they didn't accept it, the idea, but
yeah, we can only assume. And yeah. So let's not assume too much, but we are very interested, yes, for years already. So If you have, so I can share with whom we are planning to work, but if you have some connections, then we are also very open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know there's several projects that also want to connect youth with different areas, you know, that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
in different,
For example, yes.
they are already there as well. So that might be good. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now I think we are really going to round up this meeting. Thanks a lot for your time. The upcoming session is not in May. We try to do this every month, but the upcoming May, it's holiday. And we work in the university, so we're lucky. We will be back in June, and we have a very nice speaker for that. We'll get more updates about it in a very short time. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. See you soon. Bye-bye.